Well, you all, the election happened. And boy, oh boy, do I have a lot to say. We're going to be taking a look at, of course, the national elections, but also at some local election things as well. We're going to talk about bad things, we're going to talk about good things, and we're going to talk about some interesting / hilarious points that I want to make. So we're going to have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Now, voting's done. So you may be thinking, well, I don't really need to stay that much more informed. I don't have to vote again in Kentucky for 2 years. That's right. You get yourself a year off from voting, or 1 year we get off every 4 years. However, you'd be remiss to not keep tuning into the Andrew Cooperrider Show, because here's what we have before us. Now we have coming up the legislative session. It'll be the short session, the off-year session, which is a little bit shorter. So we're going to have that. But also, we now have leadership in the House elections, too, as well. I'm told that they're doing some interesting movements there. We'll probably talk about that tomorrow. But then we've got a big shuffle coming up in 2 years. And so you're going to start seeing Republicans, after session ends, you're going to start seeing most Republicans are going to run in those races start to come out. What do I mean? Well, you've got the 2026 Senate elections that it certainly seems like Mitch McConnell will not run. If he does run, I think he's going to be challenged in the primary, and he should lose. I mean, he's so old, and we're talking that's 6 more years at time he would be in the Senate. I mean, we've seen him freezing up. He's already stepped down from leadership in the Senate as well. I mean, that guy right now, Mitch McConnell, is 82 years old. 82 years old. And so in 2026, he'll be 84. 84! The man runs for re-election. He would not be leaving office until he was 90 years old. 90 years old. Okay? I don't think he's going to run it. I mean, he may. I don't know, but I don't think he is. So, and if he does, I think he's going to, like I said, be challenged pretty heavily. So that now comes about who's going to take over a spot. A lot of whispers, a lot of conversations. Seems like Andy Barr might be taking a look at it. Seems like maybe I've heard rumors Thomas Massey might even look at it, though I've also heard rumors he might run for governor, heard Comer might run for governor. But obviously, if Mitch McConnell steps down, Andy Barr runs for his seat, you may see also maybe some other players. You may see Kelly Craft come back and run for that seat. You may see a few people run for that seat. And so my only point to all of you when it comes to that is that because you'll see a shuffling with congressional seats potentially, if both Andy Barr and Thomas Massey run for that Mitch McConnell seat, well, that will open up now 2 congressional seats. So now we'll have primaries in both northern Kentucky, which always promised to be interesting, and now central Kentucky area. So there's going to be a lot to cover. And I say all that to say this. It is not time for you to stop paying attention to what's going on. It is time for you to pay even more attention, because you need to hold people accountable. So in 2 years, you know how to vote. And that's why I want to encourage you. Make sure you tell others to stay informed. Keep listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show and other shows that cover state-level issues and topics more than just the national issues, because that's where you will make the largest difference over the next 4 years. Will be at the local level. It's really hard to move, some congressman's vote in Arizona, but you can move that state house reps vote that's right in your own backyard pretty easily. So without further ado, let's dig into some election night conversations, what we see so far. So I'm going to start off. Let's start off with we'll start off with bad things. So let's start off with the bad things. And this is just the first bad thing I want to talk about is goes hand in hand, I guess, with Amendment 2 as well. But it goes to with the general mindset of our voters. And this is something that's always, it's difficult for me. Primary voters in the Republican Party, I feel I understand very well. When it comes to general election, and you now have these masses, I mean, these massive masses turning out to vote. And the level of, I just, how they think sometimes, I think on big issues like presidential elections where they're just being hit with tons of advertisements, you can generally parse out how they think, what those elections, why they go the way they do. When it comes to general elections, high turnout elections, in especially blue areas, I have no idea why they think the way they do. I'm just going to be honest. And the perfect example for how I just fundamentally don't understand their thought processes of this isn't even the majority of people. I mean, we see that nationwide. But these thought processes of blue people, I mean, these are the same people that voted for Kamala Harris. And the perfect example of this is an ad valorem tax vote that took place in Lexington. Let me explain what was going on there. So they put forward a ballot initiative to create their own ad valorem tax that generate about $8 to $9 million a year. It's dependent upon, of course, as property goes up, that amount goes up. But that would generate a specific Parks and Rec funding, fund for trails and parks and Parks and Rec things. That isn't the entirety of the Parks and Rec budget. That's not even close to the entirety of the Parks and Rec's budget, $8-9 million. But what's interesting is the fact that they would essentially vote to raise their taxes. Because understand, okay, the city already sets aside money for parks, all right? So this isn't something where it's like, oh, the parks need money and they have nowhere else to get it. Like, the city sets aside money for parks. So if parks needs more money, they could get it from the city. It's not like, you'll hear a lot of Republicans make this argument, especially at the state level, about the road fund. That, the road fund's its own fund that's funded through gas tax. And there's no other place where we could possibly ever get money to do our infrastructure, which is false. I mean, you can always give it more money from the general fund, but they'll pretend that like that's not a thing. But anyways, they'll say, you got to use that money from the road fund for the roads, which is true. That's dedicated funding. And so if we want more money for roads, well, we have to raise our gas taxes because, infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. And we can't just take money out of the general fund. Like, that's like an argument you'll hear. But that's not even close to a true argument in Fayette County. There's no argument of, well, if we want to fund the parks, we have to increase the park fund. Like, it just didn't exist up until now. And so this fund generating $8 million, what the voters have said, because and I'm not talking like it was like 51-49. No, it was like 60-40. Like 60% of Lexington residents willingly voted to raise their taxes. Willingly raise their taxes. $8 million. Because I guess they looked at each other and said, well, the city spends their money great. I mean, never mind the fact that the city spends $11 million a mile on trails. Talking about Legacy Trail, which is about 2 miles long, that they spent $22 million building. They're spending like $80,000, $90,000 on picnic benches. I'm not kidding you. But it's like you look at the city, and the city of Lexington's budget is $938 million. So almost $1 billion. Okay. So we are talking about this money that they set aside is less than 1% of the city's budget. Less than 1%. Now you're going to sit here and tell me what they just voted. All those Lexington voters, whether they realize it or not, and they probably don't realize it because they don't think. What they just did was voted to say that the city of Lexington doesn't misuse, abuse, or waste even a % of their budget, that they couldn't find this $8 million anywhere else, that there was nowhere they could have shaved the fat, there was nowhere where they could have saved the money. They have to get this $8 million. They are tapped, and they got to get it from your pocket. And then the voters turned around and went, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and this is where I say I don't understand the thought process here, like, at all. Because you think to yourself, it's like common knowledge that our government is wasteful, spends too much. Like, that's like something I thought everybody agreed upon. I thought everybody agreed upon it for the most part, outside the most radical leftists that believe some sort of monetary theory that because the U.S. is just so amazing, it can always borrow money from now in forever and never have to worry ever again about ever needing to pay back its debts, so it can just borrow, and take care of everybody. Like, that's like the thought process of like AOC and others. So they're going to obviously think the U.S. doesn't spend enough because they just think the U.S. can go into debt. But for the vast majority of people, when asked the question, does the U.S. spend too much money or not, the vast majority of them say that it does spend too much. And I'm sure if I went into Lexington and I said, do you believe that the city government, okay, has any waste at all? Do you think the city government wastes at least 1% of its budget? I believe if I actually asked that question, the majority of Lexington residents would say yeah. But yet, here we are. They're voting to raise their own taxes because they're like, well, they can't cut 1%. Can't do it. And it's that I just don't identify with that thought process. I think it's moronic and it's stupid. Who votes to raise their own taxes? I always wonder, I'm like, how did the income taxes get into place? And then I see things like, the city of Lexington voting to raise their own taxes because the city can't save 1% on its budget. 1%. Absolutely ridiculous. But going into votes that, at least this one makes more sense, where I understand how they ended up voting no on it. We have Amendment 2, which loses pretty badly. I mean, it does. There's some writing on the wall about this, and those of you who listen to my shows the past few days where I talked about this specific amendment, I did talk about how the polling on it showed it pretty even, but there was like this gigantic amount, like 20% of undecideds. And the problem when it comes to constitutional amendments, the default is no. The default is I'm voting no. If I don't know anything else, I'm voting no. And so you have to convince people to vote yes. And what ended up happening, and you got to think about this as coalitions go, okay? So when I thought it would be a little more difficult, I thought it would be hard for the yes people to build a coalition a little bit, right? Because the place where you think they would build it at would be, well, they need Democrats to get on board inside the cities. But actually, when you've looked at historic polling data of places like Lexington and Louisville, of urban city centers, support for school choice is very high. Then, when you went to the rural areas, school choice was either not as much support, or generally speaking, they were apathetic about it. But generally, a lot of them did still support it. And it's been a Democrat, like nationwide, school choice is generally supported by Democrats as well. So you thought, well, this is going to be kind of hard because where are they going to carve it out, right? Because they go out to the rural areas, they got the Republicans out there. Then if they go into the urban areas, the Democrats there support school choice. How are they going to carve it out? But what I didn't count on is how much, and I guess I don't want to call it naiveness, but you realize how apathetic RPK is. I was hoping with the new leadership and how there's more and more true conservatives joining the state party, that we would see a difference, but I was mistaken. The party decided they weren't going to get behind it at all, and none of the party apparatuses either, such as the not the grassroots groups, but they were involved, but the higher paid grassroots organizations that are directly tied to the party funds, the party PACs, the party could push more donors in that direction, really didn't. What ended up happening is that the big money that came in to support school choice really just came from a few key millionaires out of state and billionaires out of state that, for whatever reason, their entire belief, their countrywide viewpoint is that they want to see school choice. So they fund things. And I'm talking about people like, Jeff Yass will dump millions and tens of millions of dollars into school choice. He's a prominent donor behind Rand Paul, of course. And so, they'll dump money into things like school choice and others in order to, it's just a belief system they have. The same way that you have, your Soroses putting money into whatever they believe in on the left. You have people like Yass and other billionaire donors on the right that kind of do a similar thing with their own kind of pet issues. And so what ends up happening when it comes to Amendment 2 is you had that money come in, but you had a fair amount of money on the vote no side. And you had a default vote no too as well. But what I didn't count on was how much the Republican establishment in Kentucky would basically specifically try to kill this actual kill the amendment itself. And they really didn't get behind it at all. They didn't put any resources into it at all. In fact, they refused to pass it out of the legislature unless certain people were hired to run the PACs and things, and those people that were hired to run those PACs really kind of like, obviously not great at their jobs, but that's kind of par for the course. I mean, we see that, the establishment consultants that will toe the line and take on those things, they're doing careers politics. They make money off of it. The big money's with the people who are willing to sell their souls, because then they generate the money to go ahead and pay for the consultant class, and then they come in and do their thing. But they lose. So often they lose here in Kentucky. The consultant class does. That works for the establishment. They lose in primaries when they even have high funding, because they're defending some of the worst people, and they don't know how to campaign in a creative way. They try to use the terminology and the belief system of true conservatives, while then they themselves not being it. And it just rings hollow to those highly involved voters that vote in the primaries that are a little bit more and paying more attention than those in the general do, just frankly speaking. But anyways, they insist on hiring these people who are not creative and have no idea how to run creative and exciting campaigns. And importantly, too, there wasn't really a point group or one person either, for the amendment to push. Now, you kind of had some of that on the vote no side of things. Also, you had the schools coming into play. I cannot understate how much the schools getting involved in this, and then our Attorney General doing nothing affects the outcome here. That's truly it, because you have them pumping out things. So you had like the KY Policy Center put out these documents. This is crazy, right? So the KY Policy Center puts out these documents that say a county has 0 private schools, and then says if school choice passes, we think your taxes will have to be raised $10 million. How did they make up this fund? I don't know. They just cooked up these numbers. They had some methodology behind it, but they put it out there like it was factual. Then they handed it off to the schools, because it's the think tank, the KY Policy think tank, is run by the teachers unions. They hand it off to the schools especially. And then they passed it off as factual things to hand out to their friends and family and to the community, to say this is like a factual thing. And of course, they think it's true because, it's coming from the people who would know, right? The people in, the schools. But nobody spoke up to say, no, that's not the case. And I think that's where the failure of messaging came on Amendment 2, is that, one, nobody pushed back on this concept that rural areas were going to somehow not have school choice options had that passed, or they wouldn't have more opportunities. And like I said on the show many times, I know of people in these rural areas, places that where the KY Policy think tank fact sheet said there was no private options, that go to privately run. They're called homeschool kind of pods right now. They define them as homeschools, and there's some interesting ways they're run. You pay a little bit of tuition, not much, and they're like in old school buildings even. You turn up, you go to school 2, 3, 4 days a week. In some cases, it's in a school building. You have classmates. You have people you interact with. You do events in communities. Parents take turns running the classrooms as far as helping out, but they also have, special teachers that come in to teach special subjects. And these are real options that allow people to work, 2 jobs, husband and wife to both work, and then at the same time also educate their kids. And they're not super expensive either. And so those kinds of options, knowing that those options exist, I think would be incredibly important, and that didn't really happen. Now, continuing on with the bad things, it's interesting. Those of you who listen to the show know, obviously I was pulling for Thomas Jefferson to beat Adam Moore, not just because Thomas Jefferson's honestly just a really good guy, and I've known him for a while. And obviously, Killian Timney held that seat. He beat him horribly in a primary to just show Killian Timney exactly look, you do not represent the Republican Party, and he didn't. And so it came down to a general, and frankly, Adam Moore, it looks like he's winning that general. I mean, it's really close. As I'm recording this, they haven't called it yet, but Adam Moore's up by 120 votes, 99% reporting. The chances that what hasn't reported is over 120 and they all go for Thomas Jefferson's very low, but I guess not technically impossible. But, I think it's pretty safe to assume that Thomas Jefferson didn't win that race at this point. And so you say, well, why'd that happen in that race? And I think we can look at the same situation when we look at the Vanessa Grossel-Sherilyn Stevenson race, where Vanessa Grossel looks like that one has been called, but it does look like she's going to win that one. And, those of you who listen to the show, no, I don't particularly like Vanessa Grossel because truthfully, and I mean, she just said it. I mean, the Herald Leader published an article today where Vanessa Grossel is talking about how she's openly a moderate Republican. Like, she's like, yeah, no, I'm not like really a Republican. Of course I'm not, but I won, so that makes me great. And it's the same reasoning that happened there. And frankly, it's that, Thomas Jefferson, TJ there, was not supported by the establishment at all. TJ had raised like $40,000, I think like $35,000 through the whole campaign. Meanwhile, Adam Moore, I think, spent like $150,000. Also, the horse racing groups came in because they were still upset about Killian Timoney. They dumped some money too as well. I mean, I think when all is said and done, you've seen $200,000 dropped into that race by Adam Moore and only like $30,000 on the Thomas Jefferson side. Now, you rewind to the primary in that race, and you see that Killian Timoney outspent Thomas Jefferson 10-1, but lost so badly. But you have to remember that there is a diminishing rate of return when it comes to money. And what you have here when it comes to the voters in the primaries is there's only like 3,000 voters. And so realistically, if you have 30, 40,000, or if you have 500,000, it doesn't necessarily super matter. It's not a big difference. But when you move into the general, when you have 25,000, 30,000 voters potentially, stretched over 20,000 households, that's a lot to reach. And your rate of diminishing return, your point at which money can't deliver election, is far greater amount of money where, look, if you can't hit this bare minimum, it's hard for you to compete with somebody who just has more money. And frankly, Adam Moore just had more money. He's able to get out more messages against Thomas Jefferson. And people believed him because there was nothing to argue back on the other side. I mean, you literally have Adam Moore, who I'm not kidding you. This is literally what the Science of Mind cult believes. He attends a Science of Mind meditation center like every single weekend. Okay. It's like his church, right? He attends every single weekend, and it's the Science of Mind cult founded by Ernest Holmes, and like literally believes that you can talk to plants. Like they have events where they plug electrodes into plants and listen to their music, and like they believe that plants have consciousness that we can connect to, and you can manifest your life by using those things. That's literally what he believes. It's the craziest things. He's led every Sunday by a person named Reverend Rainbow. Reverend Rainbow. These are crazy people. And yet, they're able to attack Thomas Jefferson, the most normal guy you've ever met, as extreme because they had enough money to do so. And that really, that's what it boils down to. And that's when you look at the Vanessa Grossel, Sherilyn Stevenson race. And as I mentioned, I said, what I called it earlier on, I said Vanessa Grossel actually should win this race when we look at just turnout numbers. It'll be close. It'll be a squeaker. But, she should win when we look at turnout numbers of just straight RD split because of the new registration of the district compared to 4 years ago when the last presidential election, because you have weird turnout things, depending on the presidential election. Now, I think Vanessa Grossel, whether it be 2 years or 4 years, will end up being primaried out because she'll be Killian Timoney'd, because she'll vote just horrible and awful and on some things that come up. And, it doesn't matter how much money you dump in the primaries. If you actually vote horrible, the 20% of Republicans that vote in those primaries, they pay attention and they will remove you. As long as you're able to get the information into their hands, and then they'll even be willing to go check it out themselves and arrive at their own conclusions. However, it's a perfect example of what money can do in the generals. And I'm of some concern there, always of concern, because, it really reinforces the establishment's thoughts on money being able to buy races. It doesn't matter if you're good or if you're bad or anything else. What we need is money. And as long as we continue to allow the idea that if you have enough money, you can run whoever you want to. As long as you have enough money, if the district's somewhat competitive, not default R or default D, as long as you have some money, you can run whoever you want to. You can run literally a person who was a Democrat like 2 seconds ago, throw an R next to their name, and the Republicans will vote for him. And you can grab somebody who's, if it's somewhat split district, you can grab somebody who literally thinks, according to what Ahava Center puts out, thinks that plants have consciousness that comes and you're all God together and you can manifest and you need to sit in the woods with a circle of friends to create a force field. And that person could be considered the more reasonable person in an election because there was enough money to convince people of that. And so when that is the belief that the money gets you elected, not the people, the problem becomes that you need to do the bidding of the donor class, also who I call the investors. The problem for us as Republicans, as conservatives, is that our views on government, smaller government, less intrusive, less regulatory, spending less, does not coincide well with those donors, with those investors. And so it will continue to be a struggle between the Republicans' establishment, who's responding to the investors, and the Republican grassroots that is asking them to do something different. And so I think that's bad. Now, here's some good things, okay? One, of course, Donald Trump wins. But good things, Liberty did make some changes in Kentucky. I mean, remember overall, we did get rid of Timoney. Yeah, they bring in Vanessa Grossel, but like I said, I'm sure she'll be removed in a primary in 2 to 4 years. She's going to vote horribly. Frankly, I'd be shocked, surprised. I'd be the first one to apologize to her for saying she's literally a Democrat with an R next to her name if when some hard votes come down, she doesn't literally change it. I also hope that Republicans too, and this is before we get in some good things, realize that abortion doesn't need to be the issue you're that worried about. Abortion isn't winning or losing elections, truthfully. As much as you may want it to, it's not. Okay? As much as Democrats try to make it a big issue, it's not as big of an issue as you think it is, and it shows that we have room. Here's the good thing. We have room to be able to convince people. People are still naturally sort of pro-life. And this is what I mean when you look at, on the national level with Trump winning, what that shows us, when I mean people are sort of kind of pro-life. And this goes into, too, what Democrats need to do to be able to win ever again in Kentucky. Because right now, I mean, literally nothing happened in the House. We have the same amount of Republicans and same amount of Democrats in seats as we did 2 years ago. Nothing changed. Nothing. So it's like, yeah, you lost Timoney and got Adam Moore, but you also lost Sherilyn Stevenson and got Vanessa Grossel. So really nothing changed. And honestly, the general makeup of voting didn't change too much either, other than you got, I think Steve Rawlings is more conservative in the Senate probably than Schickel was. TJ Roberts is even more conservative than Rawlings, and he took over Rawlings' seat in the House. You also have Kim Holloway, who took down Heath. That adds to, that grouping. Now, the other good thing coming out of the primaries is how, the establishment did Bill Wesley so dirty, and you have kind of that preacher caucus joining in more so and being more willing to work with the more liberty-minded individuals in the House and go against leadership. You could see some interesting shakeups there. So overall, Liberty is doing better in Kentucky. The Liberty Republican faction, the conservative faction, is doing better in Kentucky. Had wins this year, even if on election day we really didn't have that many wins in actual November, but our wins from May have carried over and generally speaking have maintained. Now, what I'm talking about, though, when I say that the nation and people are generally pro-life, is that, quite frankly, the Democrats have gone way too far on some of these social issues, right? So I think the general populace may say, yeah, I don't care if gay people get married. They may say that. I mean, Republican conservatives take issues with it only from the sense of, like, government we're not saying government needs to arrest people, but at the same time, what interest does government have in gay marriage? I mean, the first time the word marriage showed up in federal law was in the income tax acts to give tax breaks to married couples. So the reason why they're doing that is because they're trying to make sure and deal with the idea of people having children. That's why they believe married couples getting tax breaks, because they had more dependents and children to take care of. So the very concept of government licensing marriages always surrounded procreation. And then when states were licensing them, and some states still require you to do blood tests and other things to make sure you're not related, right? That all has to do with procreation and creating children. It has nothing to do with just some type of elevated relationship. So, but putting that to the side, I think generally the people are like, I don't care if people are gay. I don't care. I guess I don't care if people are transgender. I don't care if people get abortions per se, but don't celebrate it. And I think that's the shark that the Democrats have jumped, is they don't want these things celebrated. They do not want you to celebrate abortion. It should be considered generally a negative thing. They don't want you to celebrate kids chopping their body parts off and taking hormones. Like, that isn't like a general normal thing. And if somebody's gay, okay, but we don't need to have giant parades in the streets with men dressed as dogs and little girls petting them in some weird sexual pedophilic way. We don't need that. That's too much. And the fact that they think that's too much tells you that they are generally conservative individuals. The fact that they say, you know what, I don't want abortions to be celebrated, tells you that the general consensus, the populace, the general conscience of Americans is such that they do look at abortion as a negative thing. They're already predisposed to being susceptible to arguments regarding the value of life and where life starts. And so conservatives should look at that as a good thing and a chance for them to grab a hold of that as an opportunity to convert people over to the pro-life side of things, not looking at it as something to run away from. You don't need to run away from abortion. I hope the Republicans realize that, and I hope the pro-life groups realize it is time for us, that the populace is ready for us to make a case on where life begins, and we need to do the hard work of convincing the masses that that is the case. They do. Now, some funny things that I just feel like talking about. And anybody who's listened to the show a long time, obviously I live in Lexington too, so I pay a little special attention to this. But I'm going to talk about two Lexington City Council races. One was District 4. Emma Curtis, which is a transgender, quote-unquote, woman. So that's a guy who's mentally ill, thinks he's a woman. We did find out because apparently he was sexually harassed, sexual misconduct from Representative Grossberg, that Emma Curtis, guy, thinks he's a girl, only sleeps with other girls, supposedly, because that came up in the conversation of what was reported, what happened with the Grossberg complaint over his sexual harassment, which is just funny to me. Anyways, so you have Emmett Curtis versus Brenda. I'm getting to why I'm laughing. Brenda Monterez, and she couldn't even go to city council meetings because she has a restraining order against her for allegedly being a lesbian rapist, because one of her fellow city council women got drunk with her and then woke up with her between her legs doing something, and allegedly. And so in Lexington City Council District 4, they had the choices between a mentally ill man who thinks he's a woman and allegedly being a lesbian rapist. And District 4, they end up going with the mentally ill man. But man, it was a close one too. Like, literally, and this is what I mean about the conscience that people are like, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying arrest people for it, but they're kind of weird. Like, in any other circumstance, the choice between anybody and allegedly being a lesbian raper, you're going to go with the, like, yeah, I'm going to go with the person who doesn't, like, rape people, obviously. But because they're looking at it and they say, well, you know, geez, oh, hard choices. It ended up being 51.8 to 48.2. So only 51.8% of the vote went for Emma Curtis. And then Brenda got 48.2% of the vote. 48.2% of the people were like, I'll take a sexual assault over a mentally ill man. And I look, I can hear the argument. It makes some sense. I don't know who I'd vote for in that. I wouldn't be voting. I'd be like, I don't like any of these people. I'd write in somebody. I don't know. Also, another one worth talking about here. City Council is Tanya Fogel lost. Only got 41.5% of the vote. Worth talking about simply for the fact that, well, she was the one who got into an altercation at a AT&T store off Richmond Road. You may remember that city council person who got into an altercation off Richmond Road and then claimed that the police made a fake video of her misbehaving at this store, and then published that fake video just to attack her after they dropped the charges against her because they had charged her for various misconduct that she does on the video. They decided to let that go, but they released the video because she was going out there talking, attacking them. They want to be like, no, we were right to arrest her. Here's the video. And so it's just good that she was removed. She's also the one, for those of you who listen to the show, that broke down in tears over a seating chart. There was a seating chart. They never had a seating chart before. And then people started arguing over seats and where they wanted to sit at. And so the city council in Lexington put in place just a 1 through 15 seating chart, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just went left to right with it and said, here you go, here's where you sit. And Tanya Fogel said that was super duper racist, and she also likes to cry a lot, and she needs to be closer to the door so she could get to the bathroom so she could cry because, those few extra steps wasn't worth it. Well, she goes down. The drama queen goes down. 41% of the vote is all she gets. Fascinating stuff. Interesting stuff. Makes me laugh. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today. Tomorrow, we're going to come back and say, what's next, what to watch out for, what's going to happen, what's the ramifications fully of this election. Just want to go through some interesting results I saw. There's some races you found pretty interesting that you think is worth talking about. One more thing to notate is that Scott Madden did win the write-in vote there for that Johnny Turner seat. Just something worth mentioning, but we'll be back here tomorrow. You all have a great rest of your day. Have a little bit of a day where you don't have to be as anxious about what are the election results going to be, and you can just bask in people crying because they voted for Kamala and still believe that Trump is super racist, and that means over half the country is racist, Nazis, horrible, bigoted white supremacists, and they just can't believe it. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for. Have a great day.